Welcome to Slight Reliability, the show where we learn about SRE and observability 1 week at a time. I'm your host, Stephen Townsend. Welcome to the 2025 season of Slight Reliability, the show where we learn about SRE and observability 1 day at a time. My name's Stephen Townsend, and once again, I'll be your host on this journey through unknown and constantly shifting waters. You may have noticed if you're watching this on YouTube that things look a little different. My wife and I have converted our garage into a space for creativity, and I've invested a bit into my recording gear and setup. And one of the things I've been wanting to do for quite a while is work on creating my own music for the podcast. I did actually create the intro and the outro for this episode that you're listening to now, and it's been the same for a year, but I'm in the process of learning how to use Logic Pro, and I'd like to take my podcast music to another level. And it's just a creative outlet for me and something that I really enjoy. Now, in mid-February, I'll be speaking at a virtual event called Observable Lightning Talks, hosted by Is It Observable host, Henrik Rexed. I've known Henrik for a really long time, and we've met at multiple events around the world back in my performance engineering days. And if you haven't already taken a look at Is It Observable, I'll put a link in the description of this episode. My topic is the role of observability when using SaaS products, based on my own real-world experiences over the last year. And in preparation for that, I thought I'd brainstorm some ideas here on Slight Reliability, because I've been a little bit slack and I haven't done a lot of work on the talk yet, so I thought this is a great place to start. One caveat, to keep things civil, I'm not going to mention any vendor names or tool names in this episode. So, in the last couple of years, I've seen a new wave of SaaS entering the market. And I'm not talking about simple services that you call to do a task, and that's the end of it. I'm talking about complex systems of record, products that we don't just make requests to, but which send back traffic to our other enterprise applications and services as part of complicated end-to-end processes. We've run applications like this on-prem or self-hosted in the public cloud for a long time. And I suspect applications like this are more common in enterprise and government than they are in startups and big tech. The trend that I'm seeing is that vendors who have been building these off-the-shelf products for many years, sometimes decades, are lifting and shifting those products into the cloud and shifting their customers to a pay-as-you-go model. For an executive in a big enterprise, I can immediately see the value proposition, the theoretical value proposition. I no longer have to worry about infrastructure, and I get the benefit of constant improvements and features as they're being implemented by the vendor. But as I've learned over the last year, there's pros and cons to this model. As a bit of an aside, I think it's worth noting the difference between multi-tenant SaaS, where there's essentially one shared instance of an app with many customers using it, versus the model that I'm experiencing at the moment, where there's a SaaS vendor and they give your org your own unique tenant. I don't even necessarily feel comfortable calling that SaaS. It's more like paying the vendor of your COTS, commercial off-the-shelf product, to host it for you in the public cloud and outsourcing infrastructure management to them. But SaaS is what it's branded as, so that's what I'm calling it. So now to the crux of things, how does observability work when we have big, complex SaaS products that both receive and send traffic to a variety of services, users, and systems? I'm working with one such product at the moment. It is transparently a lift and shift into the cloud. It hasn't been rewritten or re-architected to be cloud native. For observability, this SaaS product has a third-party observability tool bundled with it. And as a customer, we have no choice or control over what this tool is. We have to use what we're given. The tool that the vendor is essentially forcing us to use differs from our strategic enterprise observability tooling, which means that out of the box, it breaks our ability to achieve that end-to-end observability. So prior to this point, by using one strategic tool, we've been able to build pretty good end-to-end observability, including distributed tracing, within a very complex system or solution or enterprise architecture. Now, I can hear you already saying, hey, this is exactly what OpenTelemetry is designed for. But hear me out, it's not that simple when it comes to SaaS. So being a SaaS product, you can't just install agents or listeners. You can't necessarily instrument code either to collect or emit telemetry. The only way that that's possible is if the vendor enables it for you or provides it as a feature. In my case, it's not enabled. Not yet anyway, which leaves us in a predicament. So I want to refer to something my colleague Mark Chiavaroli talked about. We're trying to build observability pipelines in our org, which are reusable patterns to extract telemetry, get it into some centralized strategic place for us to gain insight from it. Here, we're at the mercy of our SaaS vendor to provide a way to integrate observability from their product into our pipelines. And without that, we're left with what my other colleague, Craig Jardine, calls swivel chair, which means we need to swivel our chair and go between at least two different tools, two different places to interrogate our observability data. And in doing so, we lose our ability to build that unified end-to-end view, which is one of the major value propositions of observability, and it's being put out of our reach. Being really specific, the one thing I wanted above all else was end-to-end distributed tracing to make sense of a very complex ecosystem that we're building. And right now, we don't have a way to do that. It's been frustrating for me as I'm working in this new ecosystem, trying to set up modern practices that address the observability and reliability challenges that we've had in the past. But my hands are tied here. The best that I can do is raise this with the vendor and essentially put in a feature request. The good news is that in theory, the ability to emit OpenTelemetry data is on the way, but it could be a year or multiple years before that's a reality. And I also don't know how that will look like when it's done and whether or not it will meet the requirements of the organization. Another point that I wanted to make is that with our SaaS vendor, we are essentially forced to use a specific observability tool, but we don't have direct support from that observability vendor, because we don't have a professional services agreement with that vendor. So all of our support requests go through our SaaS platform vendor, whose knowledge and capability with said observability tool is limited. I think there's something others could learn from here. If you're signing up for a cloud services which include other third parties, make sure that you can get direct access to those vendors as part of your support agreement. Otherwise, you're going to be jumping through hoops and not necessarily getting the support that you need to get the most out of this thing that you're paying for. But even if we could get metrics, logs, traces, events, any other kind of telemetry out of our SaaS platform and into our enterprise's strategic observability tool, we're now doubling up on cost. Depending on the tool and the costing model, you could end up paying twice for ingestion, for storage, or searches, and that's a pretty hard pill to swallow. It would be much nicer if the telemetry coming out of the SaaS product was raw and just natively being emitted using OpenTelemetry. So we don't have to pay a third-party observability tool on top of the tool we're already paying for in our enterprise. It poses the question of the role of OpenTelemetry in SaaS. Lots of observability, and especially OpenTelemetry, works best when you have access and autonomy over the code, configuration, and sometimes the infrastructure. With SaaS products like this, we have not quite zero, but very limited autonomy. So it makes me question whether OpenTelemetry or any observability is possible when you aren't building bespoke apps and hosting them yourself, which might well be the case if you're in a startup or in big tech. But for those of us who work in complicated enterprise, that's rarely, if ever, the case. The last challenge I wanted to mention is both monitoring and predicting observability cost in this model I've described. So I haven't explicitly said it yet, but in the situation I'm in, the vendor passes on that third-party observability tool cost directly to us. They just pass it on. So with this third-party tool, we're given a bill monthly based on what we've spent. That's as fine-grained as we get today, and that terrifies me. It would be easy to misconfigure something or to have some unintended behavior based on a line of code which generates billions of logs or events that we don't expect. And for that to continue for a month because There's no way to track that cost in real time. And the other half of that is that as an organization, we want the ability to predict at least roughly what our observability spend with this third-party tool is going to be. But we're not provided any tooling or guidance on how to estimate that. And that's also scary and kind of frustrating because I have a hunch that these costs are going to spiral out of control, but I don't have the data or even a model to back that hunch up, which makes it difficult to talk about or to raise. So hopefully I've articulated the challenges in this particular situation. In a nutshell, we've invested in a complex SaaS product. This product is bundled with a third-party observability tool, which is different than the tool that we use in the rest of the enterprise. And we have no easy way to bring those things together. So there's a lot outside of our control here, but not everything. So some of the things we're working on. Firstly, we have regular forums with the SaaS vendor to ask questions and raise concerns, and we've communicated the gap here and essentially asked for OpenTelemetry as a feature. And the good news is that, as I said before, it is in the pipeline, although it may take some time. Secondly, as I said, we're preparing to use the swivel chair approach for observability in the short term. It's a compromise, but at least we know in advance that this is a limitation that we're going to face, and we can compensate for it in other ways. Thirdly, without that white box observability, we're doubling down on black box, in particular synthetic transactions. Even in our test environment, we're simulating core business functions every 10 minutes at least and alerting people if they fail so that we can proactively look into issues and incidents. Synthetics have plenty of weaknesses, but at least it's one approach that we can use today that bypasses that lack of autonomy that comes with a SaaS platform. I guess another way of putting it relates to SLOs. We're putting an emphasis on understanding service health and using synthetic transactions as a means to track that rather than any other kind of telemetry or signals. We're also looking at other kinds of signals that we can monitor, such as tracking code deployments in all environments, including test environments, and tracking code package versions across all of our environments. Anything that can help us rapidly pinpoint which change caused an incident so we can more easily investigate issues. Longer term, we're building out an enterprise telemetry data acquisition tool, which is, in an abstracted way, it's about building a telemetry gateway using an extended OpenTelemetry collector of some kind. And we're doing this so that when the SaaS product is able to emit OTel data, that we'll be ready to receive and use it. So as you can see, one hand is tied behind our backs, at least one hand, more like 9 out of 10 fingers, but we're doing what we can with what we have. So with that in mind, here is what I would ask of SaaS vendors from my experience. Firstly, support the emitting of telemetry in the OpenTelemetry protocol. Metrics, logs, traces, events, and natively support this. Don't outsource the functionality to a third party. It just adds massive complexity around vendor relationships, cost, compatibility of technologies. Secondly, natively support context propagation for all requests that go in and out of the SaaS platform. Customers like us need to build end-to-end traces so that we can observe and operate our systems effectively. And I'm not an expert at this at all, but it sounds like the W3C trace context standard would be the way to go, given support by the vast majority of tools and frameworks. Thirdly, recognize that your customers will have their own observability tool or tools, and that whatever observability you provide is going to need to integrate with that. This point is really just reiterating what I've already said, but I think it's the high level point I'm trying to make with this episode and with the entire conference talk that I'm doing. And lastly, include expected observability costs and pricing discussions with your customers up front in the beginning. Don't let this be a shock to your customers down the line. That's not something that builds trust and confidence. So that's my thoughts so far, and now I need to go ahead and turn all that into a snappy 15-minute conference talk with some nice visuals, obviously MS Paint artwork. Well, what I want to know is, what I've described, the situation with this complex SaaS product and integrating it in with the rest of the organization, is that a unique situation that I'm in, or are you facing similar challenges in your organization? Am I imagining this rise of this new era of ultra complex SaaS products? So that's all from another episode of Slight Reliability. I wanted to shout out to Mark Chiavaroli, Damian Sharrock, and Reece Hewitt, who I bounced ideas off for this episode. And to Craig Jardine, whose term swivel chair observability I used in the episode. Thanks again for tuning in to Slight Reliability. I am pumped up about lifting the podcast to the next level this year, so stay tuned, and I'll see you all next time.